The Grievers Pact. Chapter 1. The Descent. The forest was a cathedral of silence, ancient pines heavy with snow standing sentinel over a world hushed and white. Liam, as usual, was the first to complain, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Are you sure this is it, Ben? Because I'm pretty sure we've passed the abandon all hope sign about 3 miles back." Then, ever the pragmatist, even behind the wheel of a mud-splattered SUV, consulted a crumpled printout. "Map says this is the access road. GPS just died. Typical for this far out." He squinted at the faint tire tracks disappearing into the tree line. Just a little further. "Chloe, you got reception yet?"
Chloe, a riot of vibrant colors against the monochrome landscape, shook her head, her usually bright eyes a little subdued. "Nothing, Bee. Just static and the sound of my own existential dread." She offered a weak smile, a brushstroke of forced cheerfulness on a canvas of growing unease. In the back, Maya, perpetually lost in thought, gazed out the window, her quiet presence a stark contrast to Noah's boisterous energy. Noah, the group's resident chef and morale booster, had been unusually subdued, only occasionally breaking the silence with a half-hearted joke. They were a mismatched quintet, bound by years of friendship and a shared, unspoken need for escape. Liam, the cynical doctor, always quick with a sarcastic jab, carried a weariness that went beyond his long shifts. Chloe, the artist, painted the world in cheerful hues, but her laughter sometimes had a brittle edge. Ben, the sharp-suited lawyer, emanated an aura of control that seemed to fray at the edges when he thought no one was watching. Maya, the writer, lived in her head, her quietude a vessel for unspoken stories and unfulfilled ambitions. And Noah, the chef, whose contagious bonhomie often felt like a carefully constructed facade. The cabin finally emerged from the deepening twilight, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised purple sky. It was less rustic charm and more imminent collapse. A 2-story structure of dark, rotting wood, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from under heavy, snow-laden eaves. The porch sagged, and the chimney leaned precariously. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature seeped into the car. "Well," Liam deadpanned, "it certainly has character. The character of a place where things go to die." Noah forced a laugh. "Come on, it's atmospheric. We just need a roaring fire and some good food. I brought enough provisions to feed a small army." The front door, a heavy slab of warped oak, groaned in protest as Ben pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was a mausoleum of dust and decay. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, damp earth, and something indefinable, like old secrets. Cobwebs laced every corner, and weak winter light struggled through grimy windows. "Cozy," Chloe muttered, running a finger along a dust-caked mantelpiece. "Definitely gives off murder mystery weekend vibes." They spent the next hour dragging in luggage, assigning rooms, and trying to get the ancient wood stove to cooperate. As darkness descended fully, bringing with it a biting cold that seemed to penetrate the walls, a desperate need for warmth and light spurred them on. Finally, with a plume of acrid smoke and a sputtering roar, the stove caught, casting flickering shadows across the main living area. Noah, true to his word, had started preparing a simple but hearty stew, the aroma slowly displacing the cabin's oppressive staleness. Liam nursed a whiskey, Ben unpacked his emergency toolkit, and Chloe sketchbooked by the firelight. Maya, however, stood by the cellar door, a heavy, unpainted plank set into the floorboards, a dark iron ring serving as a handle. "Anyone else feel like this place has a pulse?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It feels watchful." Liam scoffed. "It's old, Maya, and probably riddled with vermin, nothing more." But even he felt it, a subtle hum beneath the floorboards, a tangible weight in the air, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but pregnant with unseen things. "I wonder what's down there," Maya mused, reaching for the ring. "Probably just spiders and a century of dust," Ben said, walking over. Let's not start exploring the haunted basement on night 1. We've got stew and whiskey. That's enough adventure for now. But curiosity, or perhaps something more primal, gnawed at them. The ring was cold beneath Maya's touch. With a groan of ancient wood and a whoosh of stale, colder air, she pulled open the door. A set of rickety wooden stairs descended into absolute blackness. "Flashlight, anyone?" Noah called out, suddenly more interested than he let on. Liam retrieved a tactical flashlight from his bag. Its beam cut a weak swath through the darkness, illuminating rough-hewn shelves, empty jars, and forgotten tools covered in generations of grime. Dust motes danced in the light, like tiny, frantic spirits. "Nothing but junk," Liam declared, shining the light around. "Let's close it up." Then the beam landed on something tucked away in a shadowed corner beneath a sagging workbench. It was a box, old and ornately carved, covered in a fine layer of dust, but clearly distinct from the detritus around it. "Wait," Chloe said, leaning closer. "What's that?" Liam directed the light. The box was made of dark, almost black wood, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and intertwine. It had no visible hinges or latches, just a smooth, seamless surface. A tremor went through the group, a shared sense of something significant and out of place. Ben, ever cautious, picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. He ran a thumb over the carvings. "Looks old. Victorian, maybe? And strangely well preserved," Maya added, peering over his shoulder. "No dust on the box itself, just around it." Noah, usually the most outgoing, felt a prickle of unease. "What is it? A puzzle box?" As Ben turned it over, their eyes caught on a small engraved brass plate on the underside. In flowing, archaic script it read, "The Grievers Pact." Below the title, a single line in smaller letters, "Confess your deepest regret, and the game shall absolve you." A collective shiver ran through them, colder than the cellar air. Liam's cynicism warred with a nascent curiosity. Chloe's forced cheer evaporated. Ben's pragmatic mind searched for a rational explanation. Maya's literary imagination sparked to life, a thrill of trepidation mingling with excitement. Noah felt a knot tighten in his stomach. They brought the box upstairs, placing it on the rough-hewn coffee table by the fire. The stew was forgotten, the whiskey untouched. The cabin felt even smaller now, the air charged with an unspoken tension. The antique board game sat between them, a silent, dark presence, inviting them into a bargain they didn't yet understand. Chapter 2. The First Confession. The fire crackled, casting dancing light and deep shadows across their faces. The box sat like a dark heart at the center of their circle. Ben ran a hand over its smooth, cool surface. "The Grievers Pact," he read aloud again, his voice lower than usual. "Confess your deepest regret, and the game shall absolve you." It sounds like something out of a cheap horror novel.
Liam snorted. Well, given this cabin, we're practically living in one. Probably some old parlor game, or a very elaborate prank left by a previous tenant. Chloe, however, was intrigued. Her artistic eye appreciated the craftsmanship, but her spirit picked up on something else. "Look at the symbols," she said, tracing a finger over a swirling pattern. "They're not just decorative. They feel significant." As if in response to her touch, a faint click echoed through the room. A section of the box's top slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small parchment-like scroll tied with a thin black ribbon. Ben carefully extracted it. The parchment was brittle with age, the ink a faded sepia. He unrolled it, holding it to the firelight.
"Instructions," he announced. "Let's see." He cleared his throat and began to read. "Welcome, seeker of solace, to the Grievers Pact. Herein lies the path to absolution, a severance of sorrow's tether. One by one, each player must approach the game. Speak aloud with true heart the regret that gnaws deepest within you. Lay bare the wound, confess the error, acknowledge the shame. Only then shall the game assess your burden. Should your confession be sincere, the Griever shall grant release. But be warned, the game demands honesty. Falsehood bears a heavy toll, and once begun, the pact cannot be broken, not until the circle is complete.
The silence descended, heavy and profound. The fire's crackle seemed to amplify the cabin's ancient groans. Absolution? Liam repeated, a skeptical eyebrow raised. Sounds too good to be true. And falsehood bears a heavy toll? What, you get to skip a turn? Maya, ever the most sensitive, shivered. It doesn't feel like a game. It feels like a contract. It's just an antique curiosity, Ben insisted, though his own voice lacked conviction. A spooky little diversion for a stormy night. Who wants to go first? He looked around the circle. No one volunteered. The air felt thick, the unspoken weight of their individual burdens suddenly pressing down on them.
Then Noah, always the one to break the tension, however awkwardly, sighed heavily. All right, I'll go. Someone has to pop this creepy cherry. He walked to the table and stood before the box. His jovial facade, usually so impenetrable, wavered. He took a deep breath, his hands clutching each other. My deepest regret, he began, his voice surprisingly shaky, is the fire. 3 years ago, I was supposed to be watching the grill, but I'd had too much to drink. I went inside for just a minute. The next thing I knew, the whole back deck was engulfed. It ruined the restaurant's opening weekend, cost the owners thousands, and almost injured someone. I never faced consequences, never really apologized. I just ran from it. He finished, his gaze fixed on the ornate box. The silence that followed was deafening. No dramatic flash of light, no booming voice, just the insistent whisper of the wind outside, the settling groans of the cabin.
See? Liam said, a triumphant note in his voice. Nothing. Just a bit of morbid catharsis. Feels good to get it off your chest, Noah? Noah nodded slowly. He did feel lighter in a strange way. He started to turn away, relieved. That's when it started. A faint, acrid smell began to seep into the room. It was subtle at first, like something burning in another house. Then it intensified, becoming unmistakably the smell of charring wood, of singed fabric, of smoke. It filled their nostrils, burning their throats. What is that? Chloe coughed, her eyes watering. Did the stove backfire? Ben scrambled to check the flue, but it was clear, the fire burning cleanly. The smell grew stronger, accompanied by a faint crackling sound, like embers spitting and wood groaning under the assault of flames. Then, from the small, unlit kitchen, they heard it, a sharp, distinct crack, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dropping, shattering. Noah gasped, his face paling. He stumbled back, bumping into the table. No, that's... Suddenly, invisible heat radiated from the kitchen doorway, licking at their faces. The air shimmered, and through it they could almost see ghostly orange and red flickers dancing in the periphery of their vision. The sound of a roaring fire, distant but growing, filled the cabin, deafening the wind outside.
It was intense, terrifyingly real, yet utterly intangible. This isn't real, Liam muttered, his voice strained, his medical training battling with the impossible. This is auditory hallucination, olfactory hallucination. But the terror in Noah's eyes was real. He clutched his chest, gasping for air. It was exactly like this, he choked out. The smell, the sound, the heat. Just as quickly as it began, it vanished. The smell dissipated, the crackling faded, the heat vanished. The cabin returned to its previous mildew-scented silence, punctuated only by the distant wind and the mournful creak of old wood.
Noah sank into a chair, trembling, his face ashen. They stared at him, then at each other, then at the dark, silent box on the table. Liam's cynicism had been thoroughly shaken. Chloe's curiosity had turned to dread. Ben's pragmatism had no answers. Maya's quiet discomfort had blossomed into full-blown fear. It mirrored it, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. His regret. Thaya. The game wasn't about absolution. It was about punishment, and it had just begun. Chapter 3. Echoes of Shame. The terror of Noah's experience hung in the air, a suffocating shroud. No one spoke for a long time, the fire's crackle now sounding less comforting, more like an impatient clock ticking down. Liam, usually quick with a dismissive remark, was uncharacteristically silent, his jaw tight. Chloe kept glancing at the cellar door, as if the game itself might reappear there. Ben, the lawyer, was visibly struggling to reconcile what they'd witnessed with his logical worldview. Maya simply stared, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination.
"All right," Ben finally said, his voice clipped. "That was disturbing. But it's probably some kind of old electrical trick. A projector, centimeters, hidden speakers. This cabin is ancient. Who knows what's wired into it?" He was trying to sound confident, but his gaze kept returning to the box. "A projector for phantom heat and the exact smell of a specific fire?" Liam countered, his voice flat. "Ben, I've seen some strange things, but that defies every law of physics I know." Chloe pushed her vibrant hair back, her usual carefree demeanor replaced by a rigid tension. It knows what Noah did," she shuddered. "That scroll said, 'Once begun, the pact cannot be broken, not until the circle is complete.' What if we don't play?"
As if on cue, a gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the windows. A soft thud reverberated through the floorboards. Ben, ever the one to take action, strode to the front door. He tugged at the handle. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder, putting his shoulder into it. The door was sealed shut. "What the?" he muttered, grabbing the latch. It was locked, but the mechanism seemed frozen, unmoving. He moved to a window, scraping away a layer of frost. The glass was opaque, dark and unyielding, as if the forest outside had swallowed them whole. He punched the glass, but it didn't even crack. It felt like solid rock. Panic began to bubble in the room.
"It sealed us in," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "The game, it sealed us in." Liam tried the other windows, the back door. All were fused shut, impenetrable. There was no escape. "This is insane," Liam said, his voice rising, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "This is not possible." The cabin, once merely isolated, was now a tomb. The air grew heavy, the scent of mildew intensifying. "One by one, each player must approach the game," Chloe read from the scrawl, her voice tight. "The circle must be complete." "So we have to play," Ben concluded, running a hand through his hair. "Or what? We die of starvation in this glorified coffin?" There was no good option. The choice was between facing the unknown horrors of the game or the slow, claustrophobic dread of being entombed. "Who's next?" Liam asked, his voice laced with grim resignation. Silence. No one wanted to relive Noah's torment. Then Chloe, always paradoxically brave in the face of fear, stepped forward. Her bright colors seemed to dim in the oppressive cabin light. She stood before the box, her hands clasped. Her gaze darted to Liam, then Maya, then Ben. Her usual veneer of lightness was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability. "My deepest regret," she began, her voice quivering, "is not protecting my little sister. She was so young, and our parents, they were always fighting, screaming. It was chaos. I was older. I should have stood up to them, taken her away, shielded her more. But I just hid in my room, pretended not to hear. I let her bear the brunt of it alone. She carried that pain, and I did nothing. A tear tracked a path down her cheek. I should have been stronger. I should have been her protector." She finished, her confession hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. The cabin was silent. Noah watched, transfixed, from his chair. Then the whispers began.
At first, they were faint, like dry leaves rustling outside, only there was no wind the same way as before. They grew louder, an indistinct murmur of voices, rising and falling, surrounding them. They weren't speaking words, not yet,
but the tone was unmistakable, angry, accusatory, filled with venom. Chloe clutched her ears, her eyes wide with terror. "No, stop it!" The whispers coalesced, forming familiar patterns. Harsh, cutting words, the sounds of glass shattering, doors slamming. Liam felt a pressure building in his head, a phantom echo of a child's fearful whimper. Ben heard a woman's shrill, hysterical shriek, a man's low, guttural roar. Maya felt an icy dread, imagining the scene Chloe described. For Chloe, it was worse. The whispers formed into her parents' voices, their arguments, their cruelties, magnified and echoing from every corner of the room. It was the cacophony of her childhood trauma, resurrected. She could hear her sister's small, forlorn cries, the sharp, biting words directed at the innocent child. Then, a mirror on the wall, long dulled with age, shimmered. Its surface cleared, and in it, Chloe saw herself, but younger, small and huddled in a corner, hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. And beside her, a smaller, even more terrified version of her sister, reaching out for comfort, only to find the older Chloe, frozen in fear. The reflection held no absolution, only judgment. "I'm sorry," Chloe sobbed, collapsing to her knees, clutching her head. "I'm so sorry, Lily."
The shouts intensified, seeming to come from inside their very skulls. The cabin itself vibrated with the phantom rage. The voices converged, intertwining into a single, piercing shriek. And then, silence. A sudden, jarring cut. The mirror returned to its dull, dusty state. The cabin was quiet once more, permeated only by the smell of mildew and their own ragged breaths. Chloe lay curled on the floor, trembling. Noah, still pale from his ordeal, went to her, gently touching her shoulder. Liam stared at the box, his face grim. "It's not just mirroring," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's amplifying. It's making them relive it." He was no longer trying to rationalize. The reality was too stark, too horrifying.
The game wasn't about releasing burdens. It was about making them heavier. It was about punishment. And they were trapped within its cruel circle. The question was no longer if they would play, but who would succumb next, and what fresh, personalized torment awaited them. Chapter 4. The Betrayal and the Burden. The air in the cabin had grown heavier, thicker with the residue of their guilt and fear. Chloe, though the active torment had ceased, was still huddled on the floor, shaking. Noah, ever the compassionate one, sat beside her, offering what small comfort he could. Liam poured himself another whiskey, his hands steady but his eyes wide and haunted. The doctor in him, accustomed to controlling chaotic situations, felt utterly powerless. Maya retreated further into herself, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the ominous box. "We have to keep going," Ben said, his voice firm, though a tremor betrayed his composure. He looked at the box, then at the sealed windows. "There's no other way out. The scroll said the circle must be complete." He moved towards the table, his lawyer's resolve battling a growing terror. Ben was a man who prided himself on control, on navigating complex situations with logic and strategy. This, however, was beyond his comprehension. He stood before the box, his impeccably tailored shirt suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He took a deep breath. His deepest regret. It was something he'd buried, something he'd rationalized away with legal jargon and professional ambition. "My deepest regret," he began, his voice surprisingly strong, "is what I did to Michael Davies. He was my junior associate, brilliant, ambitious. We were working on a major case, a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. I needed a win, a big one, for partner. There was a critical piece of evidence that could have exonerated our client, but it also implicated a senior partner, one who was sponsoring my promotion. I buried it.
I made sure it never saw the light of day. Our client lost everything. Davies found out. He tried to expose me. I discredited him, ruined his career, had him disbarred. I told myself it was for the good of the firm, for my future. But it was just self-interest. Pure, unadulterated betrayal.
He finished, his confession hanging in the oppressive silence. He looked around, half expecting a legal brief to materialize, perhaps a phantom courtroom with a gavel banging. Instead, the cabin grew colder, an icy chill seeping into his bones. From the walls, from the very floor, a chorus of murmurs began. Not screams, not shouts, but whispers, just like Chloe's, only these were different. They were insidious, betraying. He did what? Can you believe it? The rising star? A snake? I always knew he was too good to be true. His own firm, his own associate. The whispers multiplied, coalescing into a phantom crowd. Ben felt a terrible sense of exposure, as if every secret he'd ever kept, every corner he'd cut, was being laid bare for the world to scrutinize. He could feel invisible eyes on him, 1,000 judging stares. The air vibrated with their condemnation. Then, physical torment began. Invisible hands began to shove him, not gently, but violently. He stumbled, catching himself on the table. He felt a sharp jab between his shoulder blades, sending him sprawling. He tried to stand, but another unseen force pushed him down. He felt kicks, blows, the phantom weight of bodies pressing in on him, dragging him, trying to pin him down, silence him for good. "Get off me!" he roared, flailing against nothing, his polished composure shattering. "Stop it! I said stop!" But the shoves intensified. The whispers grew louder, each word a venomous dart. He heard snatches of conversations. "He's a liar. Don't trust him. He'll stab you in the back." His own words to Davies, cutting and dismissive, echoed in his ears. He felt the cold, hard floor against his cheek, the phantom weight of a foot pressing down on his throat, silencing him. He was being crushed by his own betrayal.
Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ceased. The cabin returned to its deathly silence, save for Ben's ragged breathing. He lay panting on the floor, his body aching from the phantom blows, his mind reeling from the suffocating judgment. Liam stepped forward, offering a hand. Ben took it, pulling himself up, his face a mask of shame and physical exhaustion. His carefully constructed world had been ripped apart, his deepest professional sin laid bare and punished. 3 confessions, 3 horrifying personal tortures. The game was relentless, merciless. Who's left? Noah whispered, his voice hoarse, looking at Liam and Maya.
Liam, the cynical doctor, met Maya's quiet gaze. His turn was next. He'd seen enough. The game wasn't just mirroring. It was making them experience, in visceral detail, the full weight of their self-inflicted wounds. And he knew, with chilling certainty, what awaited him. His regret was a constant, festering wound, a patient he couldn't save, a mistake that continued to haunt his every waking moment. He knew the game would show him exactly what he feared most. He took a deep, shuddering breath. My turn. Chapter 5. The Unseen Patient. The smell of antiseptic and decay, a familiar stench that clung to the deepest corners of Liam's memory, began to permeate the cabin. It was his turn. The others watched, silent and grim, as he walked to the table. He didn't want to confess, but the alternative, starvation, madness, an unending siege by the cabin's supernatural forces, was worse.
Liam, the ever-composed doctor, felt his practiced detachment crumble. He had seen death, faced immense pressure, and delivered grim news with a stoic professional mask. But this was different. This was his own guilt, weaponized. "My deepest regret," he began, his voice tight, is about Mrs. Albright, an elderly patient, routine appendectomy. Everything went by the book. But 10 hours post-op, she coded. My fault. I missed the early signs of a pulmonary embolus. Just a gut feeling I dismissed. Too busy, too confident. I signed off on her discharge, told her family she was recovering well, and then she was gone. My arrogance, my dismissal of a subtle warning sign, it cost her her life. I've carried that with me, every day.
He finished, the confession a bitter taste on his tongue. The cabin's cold intensified, but not just physically. It was a sterile, medical cold. The smell of antiseptic was overwhelming now, mingling with the coppery tang of blood and the sickening sweetness of decay. Then the sounds began. A faint, rhythmic beep, like a heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It escalated, growing faster, more frantic. Beep, 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 beep. A flatline tone shrieked through the room, piercing their ears. Liam clutched his head. He could hear it all, the frantic shouts of nurses, the scramble for equipment, the hiss of an oxygen mask, the distinct thump, thump, thump of chest compressions, the bone-jarring impact of a defibrillator paddle. He felt phantom hands pushing him aside, the weight of the moment, the crushing responsibility.
Visually, the cabin blurred. The rough-hewn walls seemed to morph into sterile white, stained with shadowy crimson. The firelight flickered, becoming the harsh glare of an operating theater. In the corners of his vision, Liam saw fleeting, spectral figures in scrubs, their faces obscured, their movements urgent and panicked. Then a voice, frail and raspy, whispered from just behind him. "Doctor, I don't feel well." Liam spun around, expecting to see a spectral patient. There was nothing, but the voice resonated deep in his bones, Mrs. Albright's voice, full of quiet desperation and a trust he had betrayed. He felt invisible hands clamp onto his wrists, pulling them forward, forcing him to move through the procedure again, but in slow motion, unable to intervene, unable to change the outcome. His own surgical tool seemed to materialize, cold and ghostly, floating before him, mocking his inadequacy.
The flatline tone wailed without mercy. The smell of death became unbearable, and the ghostly figures shook their heads, their silent condemnation of physical weight. The regret, the guilt, the helplessness, it all crashed down on him, amplified 1,000-fold. He was back in that moment, forced to watch his failure unfold, powerless to save her. "No," Liam choked, falling to his knees. "I tried. I did everything I could." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie of self-preservation. He hadn't done everything. He dismissed a gut feeling. The sounds and sights intensified, a relentless assault on his senses, until the flatline shriek became an unbearable crescendo. Then, silence. The cabin reappeared, cold and dank, but free of the medical nightmare. Liam remained on the floor, gasping, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead, his face pale with horror. The smell of mildew returned, a welcomed relief after the stench of death.
4 down, only Maya remained. The cabin itself seemed to hum with a predatory anticipation, sensing the weight of the final confession. They were all broken, their deepest wounds torn open and festered. The game was extracting its pound of flesh, not absolving, but punishing. Chapter 6. The Unwritten Life. The cabin had transformed into a psychological prison. The air crackled with residual fear, guilt, and the collective trauma of their personalized hells. Liam was still recovering, his medical composure utterly shattered. Chloe sat silently, her eyes red-rimmed, while Ben leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples, the phantom shove still a recent memory. Noah watched Maya, his own ordeal fresh in his mind, dreading what was coming for her.
Maya, the quiet writer, felt the weight of their gazes, the unspoken pressure. She had witnessed their torment, each a chilling reflection of their deepest flaws. Now it was her turn. Her regret was a silent, internal gnawing, less dramatic than a fire or a betrayal, but no less corrosive. She walked to the table, her steps heavy. The box seemed to hum,
radiating an invisible energy. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage. "My deepest regret," she began, her voice soft but steady, "is abandoning my dream. I wanted to be a novelist, more than anything. I started so many stories, filled notebooks with characters, worlds, but I always stopped. Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of judgment. I got a sensible job, followed a sensible path. I let the stories inside me die, unwritten. I traded passion for safety, and now I just exist. My life is an unfinished manuscript, a story I never had the courage to tell."
She spoke the words, and a profound emptiness settled over the cabin. It wasn't the immediate sensory assault of the others, but a deeper, more insidious dread. The temperature in the cabin didn't drop. Instead, an unnatural warmth began to spread, not comforting, but stifling. It felt like the stagnant air in an unventilated room, the kind of air that saps motivation and dulls the senses. Then, from around them, a faint rustling sound began, like thousands of pages turning, softly, endlessly. It grew, becoming a cacophony of paper, a blizzard of whispers that weren't words, but the sighs of unfinished narratives, the silent cries of abandoned characters. Maya looked around, her eyes widening. The walls of the cabin seemed to shift, subtly, imperceptibly. The rough-hewn wood softened, becoming smooth, featureless. Small, faint glows appeared in the air, coalescing into translucent, shimmering figures. Not terrifying specters, but translucent, perfect versions of herself. One, dressed in elegant clothes, was signing books for a rapt audience, a delighted smile on her face. Another sat at a grand desk, penning fluid words with effortless grace, critics' accolades floating around her like golden motes. A third stood on a podium, accepting a prestigious literary award, her eyes shining with pride and fulfillment. These spectral Mayas moved with confidence, their expressions serene, their lives vibrant and complete. They didn't speak, but their very existence was a condemnation. They were the lives she could have lived, the dreams she had suffocated. They floated around her, beautiful and mocking, embodying everything she had chosen to abandon. The rustling of pages intensified, becoming the furious flapping of wings, trapped and dying. The whispers of unwritten words grew louder, twisting into a chorus of accusation. Coward, uninspired, wasted potential. You never even tried. Maya closed her eyes, clutching her head. The warmth around her grew oppressive, suffocating, the heat of a forgotten ambition burning her from the inside out. The perfected versions of herself circled closer, their translucent forms almost touching her, their blissful smiles a torment. She felt the weight of every unpublished manuscript, every unwritten chapter, every story left untold, pressing down on her, crushing her spirit. "Stop," she whimpered. "Please, stop." The pressure mounted, the heat became unbearable, the whispers a deafening roar of regret. She felt herself being absorbed into a vast, empty library of untold tales, lost forever in the silence of what might have been. Then, with a shudder, it all vanished. The warmth receded, the rustling ceased. The spectral versions of herself faded into nothingness. The cabin returned to its familiar, decaying state. Maya stood trembling, her face pale and drawn, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. All 5 of them had played. All 5 had been punished. The circle was complete, but they were far from absolved. They were broken, vulnerable, their deepest regrets laid bare and weaponized against them. The Grievers Pact had done its work. The question remained, what now? The stroll hadn't mentioned this step. The cabin was sealed, their minds tormented. Was this the end? Or was there one final, horrifying twist? Chapter 7, The Final Clause.
The air in the cabin was thick with despair, a tangible weight pressing down on them. All 5 friends stood or sat, shattered by their individual ordeals, their initial camaraderie replaced by a weary, hollow silence. The game box sat innocently on the table, yet it felt like a living, malevolent entity.
"It's over, isn't it?" Chloe whispered, her voice fragile. "We played, we confessed, we were punished. Now what?" Ben stared at the box, his lawyer's mind desperately searching for loopholes, for meaning. The scroll said, "Once begun, the pact cannot be broken, not until the circle is complete. The circle is complete, but the doors are still sealed. We're still trapped." "Maybe it's not truly complete," Maya murmured, her eyes fixed on the box. "Maybe there's more." As if in answer, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the cabin. A soft creaking sound emanated from the ornate box. A new panel, previously unseen, slid open on its side. It revealed not another scroll, but a small, intricately carved wooden figure, a grotesque shrouded form with outstretched skeletal hands, and beneath it, a single glowing symbol that hadn't been there before.
Liam cautiously approached, his medical training useless in this surreal environment. He touched the symbol. It was warm to the touch. As his finger made contact, a soft, ethereal light pulsed from the symbol, illuminating a new section of the original scroll, words that had been invisible until now. Ben quickly grabbed the parchment, his eyes scanning the newly revealed text. His face, already pale, drained of all remaining color. He began to read, his voice barely a whisper, each word a hammer blow.
"Though each burden be confessed and each sorrow revealed, true absolution is not for the individual, but for the collective. For the griever holds the scales of torment and demands a final price. One among you, in an act of ultimate sacrifice, must step forth and embrace the cumulative anguish, to take upon themselves the shadows of every griever's regret, to become the new vessel, the living pact, the eternal suffering. Only then shall the balance be restored and the others set free. Choose wisely, for the griever's hunger is boundless, and to refuse is to condemn all to endless torment." Their individual torments, as horrific as they were, had been tailored to their own specific regrets. To absorb all of them, the phantom fire, the whispers of family trauma, the shoves of betrayal, the medical failure, the unwritten life, was unimaginable. It would be a descent into a personalized, multi-layered hell, a complete disillusion of self. The cabin seemed to press in on them, the mildew scent replaced by the lingering echoes of their recent torments. They could almost taste the smoke, hear the whispers, feel the phantom shoves, smell the antiseptic, and sense the suffocating weight of unfulfilled dreams. The choice was clear, horrifying, and inevitable. One of them had to become the griever. One of them had to be broken, utterly and completely, to save the rest. The game wasn't just about punishment. It was about consumption. And its hunger was now laid bare.
Chapter 8. The Crucible of Choice. The silence that followed Ben's reading was more terrifying than any phantom event. It was the silence of 5 people utterly broken, faced with an impossible choice. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the raw, animalistic instinct for self-preservation. Noah was the first to speak, his voice choked. Who could even do that? Take all of it? It would destroy you. That's the point, Noah, Liam said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's not meant for survival. It's meant for utter annihilation of the self. Chloe was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands. I don't think I can watch one of us become that. Ben, ever the pragmatist, forced himself to think. Logically, who among us has the least to lose, or perhaps the greatest capacity for endurance? The words sounded monstrous even to him.
Least to lose? Maya scoffed, finally finding her voice, a bitter edge to it. Who decides that, Ben? We've all been through hell. We all have lives outside this cage. Lives will lose if no one steps up, Ben countered, his voice rising, frayed nerves showing. Think, if we all die, what's the point? The conversation devolved into desperate arguments, each person's fear twisting into accusations. You're a doctor, Liam, Noah cried, pointing a shaky finger. You swore an oath to save lives. Isn't this a life to save? Liam stared back, his eyes hollow. And whose life, Noah? Just one? What about the others? What about the lives we've all lived, the people we care about? Do you want me to sign up for eternal damnation? You betrayed someone, Ben, Chloe accused, lifting her tear-stained face. You ruined a life. Doesn't that make you more accountable?
Ben recoiled. My legal battles have nothing to do with this. I make hard choices, yes, but I don't condemn innocent people to this. What about your reckless mistake, Noah? Maya interjected, uncharacteristically sharp. Your fire could have killed someone. Doesn't that weigh on you the most? Noah threw up his hands. Are we just going to list our sins and vote on who gets the worst punishment now? That's what this has come to? We're friends. No, we're not, Liam roared, the mask finally falling. Not right now. Right now we're 5 terrified animals trapped in a cage, being told one of us has to offer themselves to the slaughter. The cabin seemed to vibrate with their escalating fear and anger. The grotesque wooden figure on the game box pulsed with an eager, malevolent light. The air tasted metallic, like blood and fear.
They paced, they argued, they pleaded. Old resentments, buried beneath years of friendship, resurfaced with venomous force. Each person saw their own trauma, their own pain, and recoiled from the thought of adding anyone else's to it. Maya, usually quiet, suddenly grabbed her head, a low moan escaping her lips. I can hear them again, the whispers, the unwritten words. They're getting louder. Chloe gasped. And my parents' arguments, they're starting again. Liam felt the phantom chill of the operating room, the faint beep, beep, beep of a struggling heart monitor. Noah could smell the smoke, the acrid burning, and Ben felt invisible hands pressing against him, the weight of condemnation. The game wasn't just waiting, it was beginning to intensify the residual torments, a cruel reminder of what awaited them if they refused, or if they took too long to choose. The cabin itself seemed to shriek with 1,000 voices of regret.
The choice had to be made, soon, before the horrors consumed them all, indiscriminately, before the game devoured them one by one, without a chosen griever. The pressure was unbearable, pushing them to the brink of madness. Who among them had the strength, or the despair, to make the ultimate sacrifice? The answer, they knew, would forever haunt the lives of those who remained. Chapter 9. The Ultimate Sacrifice. The cabin vibrated with a cacophony of their resurfacing torments. The air shimmered with invisible flames, echoed with spectral whispers and shouts, reeked of antiseptic and burning wood. Phantom shoves buffeted them, and the suffocating weight of unfulfilled dreams pressed down. The Grievers Pact wasn't waiting patiently anymore. It was actively consuming them.
Noah cried out as he felt a sudden searing heat on his arm, a phantom burn. Chloe huddled on the floor, whimpering as the voices of her parents grew to a deafening roar. Ben felt a terrible, crushing weight on his chest, as if buried under a mountain of legal documents. Liam saw the flatlining monitor everywhere, the ghostly image of Mrs. Albright's pale face superimposed on the walls. And Maya, though silent, trembled as the mocking faces of her successful selves danced inches from her eyes. They were breaking. They were falling apart, succumbing to the pressure, their friendship crumbling under the weight of fear. Then, through the chaos, a voice, quiet but firm, cut through the din. Stop.
It was Liam. He stood by the table, facing the ornate box and the grotesque wooden figure. His face was still pale, his eyes still haunted, but a strange resolve had settled over him. Stop, he repeated, louder this time. The rising tide of spectral torment seemed to falter, momentarily hushed by the force of his decision. The others looked at him, their faces etched with confusion, then dawning horror. Liam, no, Chloe whispered, scrambling to her feet.
He held up a hand. There's no other way. We're all suffering. We're tearing each other apart. This is the only way out. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering on Noah, then Chloe, then Ben, then Maya.
My regret, he said, his voice clearer now, was a failure of care. A failure to see, to act, to save. It's what I do. It's my purpose. If I can't save a single life, perhaps I can save 4. A flicker of his old cynicism returned, but it was tempered by a profound, weary acceptance. Consider it a final redemption. You don't have to do this, Noah pleaded, stepping forward. Yes, I do, Liam said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I can't live with another death on my conscience, especially not yours. The alternative is worse. We all know it. He turned back to the box. Let me. He reached for the grotesque wooden figure. As his fingers closed around it, the cabin's remaining light flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Only the symbol on the box glowed, bathing Liam's face in an eerie green light. A chilling, guttural sound emanated from the box, a sound like ancient stone grinding, like a hungry entity awakening. Then the torments began again, but this time they weren't individual. They were collective, and they converged on Liam. The smell of burning wood, of charring flesh filled the air, acrid and suffocating. Liam coughed, his body convulsing. Then came the whispers, 1,000 venomous voices, accusing, condemning, betraying. He screamed as unseen hands began to shove him, to beat him, the phantom blows cracking against his body. The sterile, metallic tang of blood filled his mouth, and the flatline shriek of a heart monitor pierced his ears. Constant, unbearable. All around him, spectral figures, his unwritten colleagues, his mocking past self, danced, pointing, laughing at his failures.
He fell to his knees, his body racked by an invisible storm. His eyes rolled back in his head, his screams becoming choked gurgles. They watched, helpless, horrified, as Liam's body twisted and writhed, a vessel for 1,000 torments. The air around him shimmered with a horrifying, multi-sensory hallucination. They saw fleeting images, a blazing restaurant, a child cowering, a courtroom gavel slamming, a dying patient, a blank page. All of it, all their collective suffering, funneled into him. His skin seemed to ripple, his features contorted, as if his very essence was being stretched and torn. The light from the symbol pulsed faster and faster, bathing him in a blinding green glow until it was impossible to discern Liam's individual form. He was becoming a vortex of suffering, a living embodiment of the Grievers Pact. Then, with a final, shuddering gasp that was barely human, Liam went limp. The green light flared once, impossibly bright, then vanished. The cabin was plunged into total darkness and absolute silence. The phantom smells, sounds, and sensations vanished. The oppressiveness lifted. The air was clean, if still smelling faintly of mildew. A collective gasp escaped them. Then, with a soft click, the heavy front door of the cabin swung open, revealing the pristine, snow-laden forest and the pale light of a moonless night. The windows, once sealed, were now clear, reflecting the starry sky. The game was over. They were free. But Liam was gone. They stumbled forward, instinctively reaching for the spot where he had fallen. There was nothing there. The ornate box sat silently on the table, closed and dark, the grotesque wooden figure gone, as if it had never existed.
Only the 4 of them remained. Chloe, Noah, Ben, and Maya. Free, but irrevocably scarred. The silence was deafening, filled with the echo of Liam's final, tortured scream. They had made it out, but at what terrible cost. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The biting cold of the snow-laden forest was a shock after the suffocating heat and dampness of the cabin. They stumbled out, propelled by a primal urge to escape, gasping for air that felt clean, if thin. The SUV, which had seemed so far away, was now a beacon of hope. No one spoke. The journey back was a blur of silent tears, profound shock, and a crushing collective guilt. The vibrant colors of Chloe's attire seemed dull, faded. Noah, the jovial chef, was a hollow shell, his laughter replaced by a haunted stare. Ben, the pragmatic lawyer, clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tight, his usual control shattered. Maya, the quiet writer, simply stared out at the passing trees, seeing only the ghostly images of Liam's final moments. They drove for hours, until they reached the first signs of cellular reception, the first hint of civilization. They contacted the authorities, of course, told them a story about a missing friend, a tragic accident in the remote wilderness. They didn't mention the Grievers Pact. They couldn't. Who would believe them? Even they, the survivors, struggled to accept the reality of what had transpired. Liam was never found. The search parties combed the area around the cabin, but there was no trace, no body, no belongings, nothing. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Life for the remaining four became a fractured, distorted echo of what it once was.
Chloe returned to her art, but her canvases were darker, filled with brooding landscapes and tormented figures. Her carefree laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet sorrow. She often visited Liam's parents, offering comfort she could barely find for herself, never truly explaining what had happened, only hinting at an unforeseen tragedy. The whispers of her parents' arguments still sometimes echoed in the back of her mind, a haunting reminder of the pact and the price paid. Noah never quite regained his boisterous spirit. He continued to cook, but his food, once vibrant and adventurous, became simple, comforting, almost mournful. He sold his restaurant, unable to escape the phantom smell of smoke or the chilling memories of Liam's final agony. He became quieter, more reflective, often volunteering at soup kitchens, trying to atone for a sin he couldn't name, haunted by the fire and by Liam's sacrifice.
Ben, the pragmatic lawyer, found his carefully constructed world irrevocably altered. The drive for success seemed hollow, his ambition muted. He became restless, questioning the very foundations of justice he had once championed. He eventually left corporate law, dedicating his practice to pro bono work, driven by an unspoken need to right the wrongs he had once ignored. The phantom shoves occasionally returned, a chilling reminder of his betrayal and of the man who had paid for it. Maya, the quiet writer, found a new, terrifying clarity. The silence that had once stifled her dreams now held a different weight. She began to write again, not the whimsical tales of her youth, but dark, visceral stories infused with the dread and horror she had experienced. Her first novel, a haunting psychological thriller set in an isolated cabin, garnered critical acclaim, but she never spoke of its true inspiration. Her unfulfilled dreams had been absolved, but at the cost of her friend's very being and the chilling knowledge that her life was written only because Liam's was unwritten. They tried at first to talk about it amongst themselves, to process the impossible, but the words always failed, falling flat against the enormity of what they had witnessed. The guilt was a shared, silent burden, an invisible chain binding them together, yet pushing them apart. They never returned to the cabin. None of them could. They knew it stood there still, deep within the snow-laden forest, waiting for another group of friends, seeking a getaway, to discover an old, isolated cabin, and a strange, antique board game in the cellar. The Grievers Pact.
And somewhere, in the ethereal realms beyond human comprehension, perhaps Liam, the eternal griever, bore the weight of all their regrets, forever bound to the malevolent game, a silent, suffering guardian of a pact none should ever make. The price of absolution, they had learned, was never truly paid by the redeemed, but by the one who takes on their sorrow. And the forest, a cathedral of silence once more, held its breath, awaiting the next confession.